Hello, this is Sunday afternoon, February the 28th, 1993, and I'm Louise Tennent Smith, a member of the congregation of the First Presbyterian Church of Columbus, Georgia. This month we have been celebrating the 100th anniversary of the reopening of our sanctuary after it was destroyed by a disastrous fire 101 years ago. To put you in the picture of what's going on in the world today, I'd like to say that we are concerned with the pollution of the planet. We are suffering aftershocks from the breakup of the Soviet Union. In Europe, the common market may or may not become reality. We find that there are trouble spots around the world. There is repression in China following the slaughter in Tiananmen Square. There is starvation in Somalia, and our troops are there now to control the warlords. There are fires breaking out politically in the Near East constantly, and there is an effort, we think, to destroy each other in Yugoslavia, and perhaps the United Nations will do something about that. In the nation, President William Clinton was just inaugurated this month. We have been shocked just this weekend by a dreadful explosion in New York at the World Trade Center. We are concerned with crime, the economy, teenage pregnancy, and what seems to be a loss of some morality in the nation and in families, generally speaking. Locally, Frank Martin is our mayor, and we are struggling right now with our effort to clean up our part of the Chattahoochee River. We are also trying to settle the racial balance of the schools now, and there is an arbitrator working on a very long-term lawsuit instituted some years ago. We are also hoping that we will pass a tax on ourselves that will build sidewalks, help clean up the river, and do some other building that we feel is necessary for the future of Columbus. Today, we will be talking to several members of the congregation who have been in this church for a long, long time, and hoping that they can give some wisdom to you in the future from what they know of the past and what they think may take place in the future. With me today is Martha Yarbrough Ford, and she's been a member of this congregation since 1935, was it?
That's right.
Were you a little girl then?
No, I was expecting my first son.
Were you?
First and only son.
Wow. And so you came to the church. What brought you to the church? What made you decide?
Well, I married a Presbyterian, Dr. Sidney Yarbrough, and he was an oral surgeon, and he set up his practice in Columbus.
So you didn't grow up in the church, you chose it. You and your husband.
I grew up in the Baptist church. He and I were married in the First Baptist Church.
Well, I think it's wonderful you came here because you've been such an asset through the years, you and your family.
Oh, thank you.
And your son's a member now.
And 3 grandsons.
And 3 grandsons. What do you think meant the most to you when you came here?
I would say, well, we had a wonderful pastor. Dr. Boyd was our pastor at the time. And he would reach out to the congregation. And I remember the first day he visited us in our home. He just won us over, you know. He had that kind of personality. And we loved him so much that we named an adult ladies' Sunday school class for him. And it was organized in 1939, that Sunday school class, and it's still an active class and bears his name.
Isn't that
Yes.
wonderful? Well, I'm sure he would find that a wonderful tribute.
To say a little bit more about my husband, he was a deacon in the church. When we joined the church, we had been members in Conyers, Georgia. I taught school up there, and he was practicing there. So we started our family off in the Presbyterian church.
Well, that was a good start for him.
Oh, indeed it was.
And did they go through the youth program here?
All the way through. Miss Bell was our religious education director. She was very active and very beloved person. And then our daughter came in 1945. And then the war came. You know, that changed the whole complexion of everything.
It certainly did. Did the church serve an active role in preparing people for the war? The war we're speaking of course, is the Second World War.
The Second World War, and we had a tremendous lot of Army people involved in our congregation. And of course, really on a visiting basis, because nobody was permanent at that time. However, we weren't here much of the time, for my husband was called into the service immediately because his skill was very much needed.
I should say, yes. But I suppose there were a lot of wives who stayed here throughout the war.
Yes.
And was there any effort by the church?
Yes, we had an active gathering place for them. Back in those days, we didn't have all these wonderful facilities that we have now.
What was there then? Just the sanctuary?
The sanctuary and the Sunday school building back of
The one that's here now?
yes, the three-story one.
Uh-huh.
And every inch of it was utilized. Back in those days, our kitchen and dining room was on the second floor of that old building. And the room was very tiny. In the kitchen, we didn't have a staff of professional cooks. We all did the cooking. Took turns, but it was lots of fun.
I imagine. So you have seen then, since you came into the church, the addition to that building of the kitchen,
Yes.
the offices,
The chapel
chapel.
has been built since I've been a member, and this building that we're in now.
So I suppose you look forward with interest to our plans for the new.
Very much so. Very much so.
What do you think will be the best about that, the building itself? As you've seen
Well,
it change usage.
My husband died early in life. He had a heart attack in his office. Passed away there suddenly. And at the time, I was president of the Women of the Church. And it was a 2-year term then. So I was determined I wasn't going to give up my job because I felt the need, personal need, as well as the need to carry on the work. And the following year, I started teaching. I had taught prior to that after I graduated from college. And I loved children so much, and I enjoyed them. They were almost like, I think they did me more good than I did them. So I'm still just very fond of children. And I think that our program to enlarge the facilities for the children is a very, very basic need. We need to help mothers and fathers. And we have facilities to offer them, then they will participate in other ways.
So you think one of the great strengths of this church, perhaps, has always been the youth program?
I feel that way from the very beginning. We've had great emphasis on that. Even back when we were children and we were Baptists, my brother Omar Hayes, I was Red Hayes, and he was a member of the Scout troop down
in this church.
In this church.
Which is still, by the way, very active.
Very active Scout troop. And I have a grandson who's an Eagle Scout. He received his Scout certificate here in this church.
Do you have any particular advice to the people that are maybe going to be hearing what we say about what maybe you would see for the future or hope for the future of this church?
Yes, I feel, sometimes you feel that a downtown church does not have the opportunity to reach out. But I think our church so far has exhibited that strength, that our people still come from quite a distance to come down to church. And I feel like that by enlarging our church, the scope is going to be even broader.
That is a wonderful, I hope that's true, and I thank you so much for your wisdom and for talking to us today.
Well, I want to say one other thing, that my daughter, who married she married a boy in Chattanooga, and at the present time, she's president of her women of the church. Her name is Martha Elder.
Isn't that hard?
Yes.
So she's following in your footsteps.
Well, not so much that, but you were speaking of outreach, and it really pays off. It really does.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate your coming.
Oh, well, thank you for asking me. This was a real privilege to be able to talk to the future.
Our next guest is Deacon and Elder Frank Lumpkin Jr., who has just invited me to be sure to come to the Lumpkin organ recital March 9th here. This is something that, gosh, how many years have you been sponsoring this, Frank?
Pretty close to 20. And it was Jim Johnson's idea, and the way I happened to get it was they had a meeting, and they made me chairman of a committee to get up some money. Well, I never have been pretty good at begging, and so I said, well, I tell you what, I'll just do it. And I didn't think it was going to be but 1 year, and every year it just goes on and on. And if we have a good crowd this year, I might continue it. But when Jim leaves, I don't know whether I am or not, because we have more non-Presbyterian church people than we do Presbyterians that come to it. It sort of hurts my feelings.
Well, I can understand that. We'll have to get more Presbyterians out coming to that.
Yeah, I hope so. I really would do. Because I've been very crazy about the church. My grandfather, Wilcox, sang in the choir, and he played the flute in the choir. And I think it's in the museum, the one that he had. And then my father came down, and he was deacon, chairman of the deacons. I mean, they all had one group in those days, and he was about 30 years a deacon. They didn't change in those days. And anyhow...
get a good one and hang in there with it. Get a good
well,
one.
The thing about it was that when father was a strict, he just was, he took a drink and all, and they supposed not to drink if you're an elder, but he said there wasn't a single one of them that didn't take a drink on there. but he wasn't going to say he wasn't. And anyhow, but he was never there, and Father he smoked, but he didn't. He'd come to these Wednesday night suppers, and you couldn't hardly smell it there. I mean, everybody's smoking. I think it slowed down a little now, but it wasn't in those days. In fact, it practically ran me away. And then when he would come in and he would take a cigarette, and he didn't think you on the church ground. He'd put his cigarette down before he'd even walk on the church ground. He thought everybody ought to do that. And then also, he got in bad with the rest of the members. You know, they've always had a long list of people that don't make the payments, and I think he was treasurer, and he suggested that they post them on the ones who were behind on things, and they'd like to run him out of the church. But that's the way he was. He called a spade, and now I have a son that is a deacon, and I told him that you ought to go to Sunday school to church every Sunday or something like this. And so one Sunday, we just lived about 2 blocks from the church up there, for 3 blocks. And he came down here and he brought his dog down. And I said, well, you can't take a dog to church. And he said, well, Daddy, you said that everybody ought to go and a dog ought to go too. So lo and behold, he goes and gets a lot of scraps, and he built the dog church at home so the dog could be saved and go to church. And
that's a
so
wonderful story.
I'm real thrilled that he's taken such an interest in the church. And the children around here, he goes off on to drive those vans down to Mexico and all those things. And I about fired him for it because he was gone so much. But finally, I just quit and made him president and let him do anything he wanted to.
Now he can do anything. So how many generations then of your family have been in this church?
Well, my grandma was Wilcox, and she married a Lumpkin, and Father was the child of the Lumpkin, and then my father's father was killed, died before he was born, about 2 nights. He was in the war, and he was sick.
That was the Second World War.
No, and
First World War.
The war between the states.
War between the states. The wall. I got it wrong.
Some of these Yankees call it a civil war, but but it's the war between the states.
Exactly.
And anyhow, when he came home, he never was healthy, and so he died. And Ms. Lumpkin ended up marrying General Ransom, and they went up and lived up there, and they didn't get along so good. I mean, it was more bad. So Father came home, and Grandfather Wilcox, who was one of the pillars of this church, raised him. And he had a little insurance business and started in 1848, and it's still going. And he was the first president, my father was the second president, and I was the third, and then Frank is the fourth. In 150 years, there's only been 4 different ones running the thing. Of course, it's like it is now, the government's going sort of nuts, and I'm sort of hinting that Frank better get him another job, because here in the state of Georgia, I don't know where you're going to be able to get insurance. The compensation is required, and you can't get companies to write it.
Yeah.
And I was giving this guy hell about it, and he said, well, would you run a business if every premium you took in, you were going to lose $250? I said, no, I don't blame you. And they hold them down, and you just don't realize, especially on this automobile insurance. So many of those people steal the cars themselves, and that's what's so serious about it.
So even before that, though, I'm figuring then, if this church was founded, your family, some member of your family might have been one of the founding members of the church.
I don't think they were. I think they were back there.
Very early.
Because all of my family was poor, and they didn't want them founding the church unless they had something to give. and they wasn't on that side of it. But as it turns out, there was my mother, my father was Frank Lumpkin, and he married Annie Gerard, and she lived out in Gerard, and that's where they were married out there. And then she had two sisters and three brothers, and now those all of them are gone now. And but she lived out there, and but my mother, unfortunately, just wanted to live till I was 30. I mean, till I was 21, and she didn't make it. She died in the low 40s, and it so happened that it was tough. My father married again, and it was about the best thing for him and me too. It turned out real good. I think they lived together 30-some years, and then both of them passed away. And so, as it turns out, I've had a pretty good life. Of course, I got caught during the war. And I went overseas, and all my friends.
What do you think, if you had a piece of advice for these people who we hope will be seeing this tape in the future, what kind of thing would you say to them would be the thing that would continue this church into the future and in strength? What advice would you give?
I think that our church would be very smart to bring more people in as officers. They made a mistake in the past, and some people think they have to be elected and they stay in. And that's what's hurt our church, and I think that as nobody's indispensable, some of these guys think they got to be elected or it's just too bad. And I think that they need to bring in more people in it and have more people working. And they need to have, and I think in all the times, this Dr. Gates did so much good for this church, and then Dr. Hatton came here, and then Dr. Johnson came here, and God sent them to us, and I think they just need more people like them to lead our church. And if they don't, my father always said that you had to have the head man, or it wasn't worth a darn, and that's the way I feel now.
Well, that's good advice. So, Frank, you're saying reach out and involve people. That's certainly good advice for the future. And we thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge of the history of this church with us.
Well, it's been lucky to be with such a pretty gal. And anyhow,
Earline Patterson has been with the church and done a number of things for it. The thing that she likes to remember perhaps best is that she initiated the cradle roll. Is that what you were saying?
Well, I started that department.
The department.
When my daughter was 2 years old, I wanted to bring her to Sunday school. And had to take her in a room where there were 5-year-old children, my children. It wasn't too successful. So a friend of mine and I decided it would be a good idea to start what we call a cradle roll. And we kept them from the time they were about 6 or 8 months old till they were 4 years old.
I think that was a wonderful service to the church, and I'm sure it helped a lot of parents come.
Well, I'll tell you, it began what we now use as a nursery and everything else. But there was no place for a child.
That's right.
Yes. When she's done.
And so now I think it has grown, and lots of young. It's gotten huge, hasn't it?
Oh,
really?
yes. And now it's a great children.
Well, I think that's wonderful. You've been in the church how long, Miss Patterson?
It'll be 79 years the last of March.
My gracious. Well,
I've been
a member for 79
But I
years.
started Sunday school here in 1905.
In 05. And let's see, this is 93. Gosh, you're about to come up on 100 years there. That's pretty, you may be one of the people who can remember the farthest back. What do you remember about going to Sunday school, and what about the church? Do you remember as a child that was most meaningful to you?
You see, fortunately, I am the oldest person. I have been a member longer than anybody else. And my first recollection was my grandmother bringing me to church in 1905. And from then on, we lived out in the country, and it wasn't so easy to get to church. But I'd come to Sunday school every Sunday I could. And just from then on, we stayed in the church.
Well, was there anything that you particularly remember about the church from your childhood? Anything that sort of impressed you or that was meaningful to you?
Well, one thing, of course, when we first started the Sunday school, it was in an upstairs room, and we stayed there until we were about 7 years old. And then we were all brought down, and there was only one room that was the entire Sunday school.
Is that right?
That's true.
Everybody, all ages?
All ages. The men were in the north section and the women in the south section.
Oh, my
That
goodness.
was a place Sunday school.
Well, that must have been sort of like the one-room schoolhouses, I suppose.
That's very true. And that's what it was.
So we have certainly grown and become more sophisticated
It's wonderful.
with our wonderful building and plans.
Yes, we had just that one room, and unfortunately, the windows were low enough so that some of the bad boys could jump out the windows.
Oh, goodness.
There was a pretty rough group of them that were a little older than I was. And in those days, the men in the beautiful white linen suits in the summertime. And this teacher stepped away from his class a few minutes, and when he came back, one of the boys had put a big wad of chewing gum in the chair. Not very good for me.
Oh, my goodness.
And then when you were not looking, they could jump out of the windows. So that was some of the first things I do remember. Not some good things, though.
Oh, still, white linen suits, and that creates a picture for us, I think.
Oh, yes.
And the ladies, of course, their dresses would have been long.
Oh, yes, and the ladies all had to sit on the south side of the church.
Is that so?
Uh-huh.
Now, why was that?
I mean, on the south side of the Sunday school, they divided it. And the men over here, the women over here, and the different little classes would kind of meet in the center.
In the center.
Yes.
But in the church itself, everybody sat together?
Oh, yes. But I do remember when they had to buy their pews.
Had to buy the pews?
Oh, yes. I think my grandma's was 117. I believe that's what it was.
Pew number 117.
I think that's what it was.
And so each year, did you buy the pew? Or was...
I don't remember whether it was each year or just how often, but you bought your pews.
It was just, in other words, that was reserved for you, and it was a way to raise money for the church.
I guess that was it. They had to have money. Because we all had so little in those days. And I had one brother used to call so many of the elders and all sat on that north side. And my brother used to call it the sanctified corner.
Well, I guess it was sort of, wasn't it? That's a wonderful tale.
Oh, he called it the sanctified corner. And it was real cute to see those gentlemen in their long frock coats and the high silk hats and the canes.
Oh, my goodness. You dressed up pretty much to come to church.
They did, yeah.
So the elders wore sort of special clothing, did they?
No, it was just these particular men, I think, just did that. Some of them, no elders, no. But just the men's dress. My own grandpa used to like to dress like that.
Is that so?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody still tries to dress up now to go to church, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
I think we sort of have, I hear people saying, well, what you would wear to this particular gathering would be your church dress. And we know what that means.
I've heard that.
Nice silk dress, but not any beads.
I don't know. I hope they don't object to that.
No sequins, I mean. No sequins. But just sort of.
Oh,
And I think...
and these long earrings this day and time.
Uh-huh. Well, I think perhaps it's interesting for people in the future to know that we are still, at this point, a little bit formal in the way we dress ourselves to go to church. Not as formal as they were when you were young.
No,
but
I don't think so either.
Yeah.
Because so many of the women wore black.
Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Very,
very formal.
And a little black bonnets.
Everybody wore hats, did they not?
Oh, yes. We all wore hats until about 10 years ago. And then I don't believe it's been quite 10 years since we stopped wearing hats, has it?
Well, I think maybe it's been a little longer than that.
Do you really?
Do you have perhaps, Ms. Patterson, anything that you would like to say to the people in the future about some kind of advice or what you would think? You know, it's not what we wear so much as what we feel.
I think the strongest thing that we get is from children really beginning Sunday school early. And I think sometimes some of the teachers in the Sunday schools mean more to the children and they get a foundation that cannot be shaken.
I think that's a wonderful thought, and several other people have said the same thing. It is the reaching out to children.
I think so.
That has perhaps made this church so strong today.
Yes,
and we hope it
so.
continues.
And I think that, if I might say, I think Dr. Johnson has been one of the strongest points or characters, anything what you might ever want to come, in bringing this church to that position in life and in the cultural, I might say, program of the city and everything else.
Thank you so much for those thoughts, Ms. Patterson. We appreciate your coming to be with us today.
I have enjoyed it.
Howdy. I hope that 30 years from today, February 28, 1993, that you will be interested in the activities of the First Presbyterian Church of Columbus, Georgia, for the past 50 years. First, let me identify myself. I am Tom Starlin. I am 82 years old. My wife is Jaretha Crawford Starlin, and the Lord has not blessed us with children. I reside at 6140 Candlestick Loop, Columbus, Georgia, and my law office is at 924 2nd Avenue. I have been a practicing lawyer for the past 56 years. I joined this church on April 8, 1942, which has been 51 years ago. Someone asked me how I became interested in being a Presbyterian. I will have to go back for a little history to explain this. I was reared in the Hamp Stevens Memorial Church in North Highland. I enrolled at the University of Alabama in January of 1930 and was secretary to the president, Dr. George H. Jennings. He was a devout Presbyterian and was a good friend of the minister of the First Presbyterian Church of Tuscaloosa. I believe his name was Dr. Branch. He was a frequent visitor to Dr. Dennis' office, and I began to visit in his church. I well remember attending the funeral of Mrs. Jim Fox at this church, Presbyterian Church of Columbus, who was my grammar school teacher at the North Highland Elementary School, which is now named Fox Elementary in honor of Miss Fox. Her husband was Jim Fox, who had previously been manager of the Columbus Foxes baseball team, and her two daughters Sumac and Jane were reared in this church. When I came back to Columbus to practice law in 1942, I began attending this church. At that time, Dr. Eben Reid was a pastor, and he was a highly educated and very fluent speaker, having a great command of the English language. His sermons were so good, they were printed the following week and made available to the congregation on the following Sunday. He was also a minister in World War II, and we had so many people attending the church, we had to put chairs in all the aisles. Mr. W.H. Young, who was the father of my then law associate, Billy Young, was a leader in this church, and it was through his influence and the sweet memory of Mrs. Fox that I decided to join. I was married twice in this church. My first wife, Cora McGee, died from surgery. I have been past president of the men's Bible class. Judge Hicks Fort was our teacher, and we had over 100 members. I was president of the men of the church in 1965 and was a member of the Board of Deacons from 1966 to 1969 and from 1981 to 1985. I was chairman of the Board of Deacons in 1969 and vice chairman of the board in 1984. I became an elder in 1988 and served until 1991. I was chairman of the service committee for 2 terms and have been a member of the Under Shepherds program since its inception. I think you will be interested in the fact that when I was chairman of the Board of Deacons in 1968, we noticed that the upper walls of the sanctuary were buckling in. We called an engineer who inspected the properties and told us that we could not have any more meetings in the sanctuary until it was repaired. Of course, this was a shock, but fortunately, we were able to rent the Spring Opera House to have our Sunday services. And it took about a year to make the sanctuary structurally safe and to do the other remodeling and refurbishing which we wanted to do. The appropriate committees were appointed to select new carpeting, new pews, and the many other things which were required. At that time, I was an attorney for First Federal Savings and Loan Association of Columbus, now Barnett Bank of Southwest Georgia, and I handled legal work for a loan of $150,000 by the church from First Federal to pay for the remodeling and to purchase the property on which the present education building is located. We are also placing in the time capsule an abstract of title dating back to 1847, prepared by me, of several tracts of land on which the present church and its additions are located. During the remodeling, or shortly thereafter, the Bill Fagner family, he was later mayor, provided a beautiful chandelier which now graces the sanctuary. Our Connect family, which owns and operates the Connect Stairs in Columbus and Atlanta, usually sit near the center of the sanctuary. And someone remarked that if that chandelier ever fell, it would wipe out the Connect clan. They are a very prominent and useful family in our church. An interesting thing happened when I was elected to the Board of Deacons in 1981. I believe there were to be 7 persons to be elected out of a slate of 14. I was tied with another member, so they decided to have a runoff the following Sunday. The first Sunday I was not present, since I was out of town. However, I made it a point to be present and vote for myself on the second go-round. And would you believe it? It was another tie vote. After some deliberation, it was decided to just increase the class for that year, and both of us were elected to serve. The other incident in which I think you would be interested was in the year 1983, when we constructed the handicap ramp, which now exists on the north entrance of the sanctuary. First, there was quite a bit of reluctance on behalf of the church officers to do anything to a 100-year-old structure. But we finally prevailed, and after the ramp was erected and landscaped, it looked like it had been there 100 years. In 1984, while I was a member of the Board of Deacons, the church, with encouragement of our very able minister, Dr. James V. Johnson, Jr., decided and authorized the deacons to form a non-profit corporation entitled First Presbyterian Apartments of Columbus, Georgia, and to apply for a loan under 202 of the Housing Act of 1952 as amended to erect a retirement home. I was the attorney for the corporation, and with the assistance of an attorney in Tampa, Florida, prepared for the church a very elaborate loan application. Our application was not granted that year, so we reapplied the following year. Again, we were unsuccessful, and partly, apparently, due to the lack of support by our United States Senator Mattingly. This was one of the few projects the church ever undertook that was not successful. Also, while I was chairman of the service committee, the church, in cooperation with other downtown churches, sponsored and established a food pantry for the distribution of food for needy persons. That project is now operating and is very successful. A former member of our church, Miss Gertrude Pollard, died in Atlanta in 1977. In her will, she provided that on behalf of that one half of the remainder of her estate would be given to our church, with the understanding that the funds were endowed and only the interest could be used for charity purposes. Over the years, those funds have been wisely used and distributed by the service committee with the approval of the Board of Trustees, Board of Deacons. When I was chairman of the service committee, at my suggestion, the committee recommended that a suitable plaque be erected in honor and memory of Miss Pollard. This matter was discussed at length at a meeting of the session, and one of the members stated there was no practical way that we could erect plaques in memory of everybody who had done a great deal for the church. In arguing the point successfully, I stated that if anybody gives this church $500,000 endowed, we would erect a plaque in their memory. That plaque is now proudly displayed in the vestibule of the sanctuary. We had another benefactor of the church who died, Miss Josie Stacks, who died April 11, 1991. I prepared her will, and she gave the net remainder of her estate to the church, unearmarked, which amounted to approximately $500,000. The officers of the church wisely decided to place those funds in escrow too, and to use only the interest for maintenance purposes. I hope that a suitable memorial for Miss Josie Stacks will be provided, and I hope that it will be in the form of a plaque in her honor and memory, and displayed also in the vestibule of the sanctuary. Well, now, I have rambled and reminisced for the past 50 years of our church, and I predict even a greater future for the next 30 years. Finally, we pray that God will continue to bless and prosper this great church, its staff, workers, and members. Thank you, and good luck.
We are with Mary Jane Gates now. She and her husband came here in 1961, and he was minister of this church for several years. I thought it would be wonderful if you could give us some of your thoughts about the church as it was when you came here, because that'll be quite different today, isn't it?
Well, as you said, we came here in '61. It was January. And my husband and I and Eugenia, our daughter, and Sid, our son, were just so delighted to come to Columbus. We had heard lots about it, and I've never been here but just one brief visit. But I've been so pleased with it. And when we saw this magnificent church for the first time, it was so thrilling. It looked like the facade out front looked like a cathedral.
Well,
and I still think it's the loveliest church in Columbus.
Oh, I do too.
And Sidney was so thrilled with the television extension of his ministry. He liked things like that. He knew things. That was to him a new part of his ministry. And he was just challenged tremendously with this gracious, loving, and caring congregation. Marvelous. We were thrilled to death.
Well, so you felt the love and caring of the congregation from there. The edifice, of course, is marvelous, but what's inside?
Yes, and that sanctuary inside, when we got inside and started worshiping with the people, that's when you get your inspiration.
Exactly, from the people, really.
And I thought I would never learn all the twists and turning with the halls and upstairs, downstairs. I thought, will I ever learn this? I'm easily confused about rights and lefts of that. new directions. But it wasn't long, and because then we had just the educational building, the 3-story Christian educational building, and the chapel was here in place, and also the ground floor of the chapel was where we had the midweek service, the family night supper and a prayer part, and Sydney always had a Bible study.
Oh, so the kitchen and dining room had moved from the second floor of the education building.
Is that what it was before we came?
It was yes, it was there first.
Yes, it was the ground floor. And then when we outgrew that, this congregation is always ready to go and fill in the needs for whatever they are. And so, well, we needed a new organ soon after we came, and they went out and bought the finest they could find, and we still think it's the finest in this area. We get lovely concerts each year because it's such a fine organ.
Well, it certainly is, and the Lumpkin organ.
Yes, I do.
I hope those will be continued somehow. When you think of what's going on 30 years from now, which is what our audience will be.
That's right.
They'll be there, and maybe we won't, but
we'll watch.
We'll watch. We'd like to know what you think. Maybe what would you like to say to them about the church and what you hope for it?
Well,
advice.
Of course, my first involvement with Christian education, since I was an elementary school teacher, was the primary department, which became in need of a leader soon after we got here, and I was delighted to fill the spot when they asked me, and taught there for 7 or 8 years, and enjoyed that tremendously. And I found that we needed lots of things to make that more profitable for children, and we're going to attain it in this new building expansion that we're having. They're going to work on that, and I'm so delighted. Couldn't be happier about that.
I do think the youth program it has been said over and over with the people who know the church well, as do you, that the youth program is perhaps one of the most important programs here.
That's your future church.
That's your future church.
And I'm so delighted. Many of those children I taught in the primary department, it's just the timing. It's not necessary that I taught them, but they are taking the leadership now. They're becoming elders and deacons, and I'm so excited when I see them taking part. It thrills you. It thrills you.
So you would urge the future to remember the past and keep the children moving in the programs.
Yes, because that's your new church coming along within the old.
It certainly.
And we need to train them early while their minds are young and eager to learn and eager to retain it. We lose some of that as we get older.
Yeah.
I know.
Well, is there any particular incident or thing that you remember that was particularly meaningful to you, other than, of course, your involvement with the children and general programs? Was there any one person or any particular part of the church or
well, of course,
any incident?
Well, what stands out mostly in my mind is because Sydney had a heart attack after we'd been here just 6 years. And that was a terrific blow to us.
Of course.
But the church goes on, and God sees to it that his work goes on, and that's delighted my soul.
And so where did you all move from when you came? You were in Georgia, but
in fact, we were in Atlanta. I was
Atlanta.
teaching school in Atlanta. And then we were married, and he had a church in Atlanta, but we stayed there about 3 years, and then he went to Salisbury, North Carolina. Our family did our first church there. And so we were there 15 years.
So you really moved from North Carolina to the church?
Yes. And
well, we're certainly thrilled that you're still here.
Well, I loved Columbus, and I love this is my home church to me. I've lived here longer than any place. And I feel so at home here. And my children do, though they are grown and away, they grew up here. And we just feel the love of the people, and it's a delightful church. Just
I think there's a lot to that too, perhaps. The the friendship and the love of each member for the others.
Yes.
I think you feel that.
You feel it.
And the kindness
and when you're sad, they're sad, and empathizing with you, and that helps.
I
And
know.
when you are happy, they are happy. That's a great healer.
Well, it is, and I think that's something that people who have come into the church have commented on, who are visitors or strangers, and they have commented on the welcoming that they have felt in the church. And maybe that's something, too, that...
It's very unusual for a church of this size to be as friendly as this church is. It's really,
I think it is.
It's really unusual, and we're very proud of it.
Mm-hmm. And I think maybe that would be another thing that we would hope would continue into the future.
And I know this new building project with the Family Life building coming along to fit the needs of all ages, that we're going to have more and more fellowship together with each other. And that will be great. It will just be so beneficial.
I think it will be, too. I'd love to have some final words from you. We're about to wind down on our time here. I'm sorry to say.
Well, we probably said enough, but I think if we just keeping on doing what we're doing, and just grow into these progressive stages naturally and enjoy them, because that's the way the good Lord would have us do.
And as someone else said, somehow what was needed has always
come.
This church has always come forth.
That's what we noticed from the very start.
Is that so?
Yes, yes. And it comes forth, and whether it was air conditioning or whatever the need of this church and its congregation needed, they provide in a beautiful, unselfish, Christ-like way.
Thank you so much. I don't think we could add anything to that.
Well,
appreciate your coming.
Glad to be here.
J. Eben Reid has been a member of this church since 1952. And I said, well, Eben, why did it take you so long to join? He said, because I didn't move here till then. Although his brother was pastor of First Presbyterian from 1938 to 1945, he never visited the church until he moved here in 1952 to be head of the Chamber of Commerce, and then eventually went to work for what is now Trust Company Bank. Eben, did you like the church when you first saw it?
I just enjoyed it so much. I remember the first time I came in to the church. My wife Helen and I, and my young son Larry Reid, we came into the church, and people were very friendly to us. There'd been a story in the paper about our coming in a day or two before, and we were greeted at the door. And it was just a very, very pleasant experience the first time we came. I'll never forget one lady. She's dead and gone now. I will not call her name. But she greeted me at the door that day, and I never will forget it. I was introduced to a lot of people there at the door as we went out. I guess it's because it's been in the paper that we were here. So a lot of people spoke to us, very, very friendly, and we were impressed with that. I came back the following Sunday, and still people were pleasant. And I remember this dear lady, she came up, and she came, I met you last week, and I bet you don't remember my name. She embarrassed me. But that was still, she was just a nice lady. She she put me on the spot, and I couldn't have quite called her name. But I knew her 2 weeks ago. I'll never forget her after that. But it was a real nice experience. People have been extremely nice in this church. And I just have enjoyed my relationship with them from then on till now, to this present day. Of course, there have been several pastors during the interim period. And now we've got Dr. James Johnson. I've been in many, many churches.
because I roamed the country of the United States. I was in schoolwork at one time in South Carolina, and then I was in the FBI and moved around to a number of states, numbers of churches, but I have never enjoyed a church as much as I have this one. And I have never had as fine a pastor as I've had in Dr. James Johnson. He's marvelous, and we are going to miss him immensely when he departs.
We certainly are.
We certainly are. He's going to be a hard man to replace. However, I do know Dr. Jack Lancaster, who's coming in as interim pastor, and he'll be a fine replacement. But nobody can take Jim Johnson's place, but I think we are fortunate in having an outstanding man to serve during this period of time when we're looking for another pastor.
I think we are too, and I think maybe the Dr. Johnson's kindness and caring has perhaps permeated the congregation because they all seem to be. That's been reiterated several times.
That is certainly true.
Friendliness.
Well, I hear this from all around in the community. So many people say, "Oh, your Dr. Johnson is going." Dr. Johnson has really been a minister not only to the First Presbyterian Church, but that people in other churches recognize him and how much he's contributed to the community. And he drops in on people from other churches, not in a way at all proselyting, but he knows them and knows them as friends. He drops in and sees them when they're ill. And I think it's marvelous. So he's been really a minister to the entire community.
Yes.
Yeah.
What other things do you think about the church? Was there any particular incident or part of the church that's important to you, or any experience that you had after you were a member? The greeting, of course, was wonderful, and the friendliness.
Wonderful. And the interest I found taken in the young people of the church has been made an impact in the community. The young people, I know that we've got a number of people that are members of our church right now who were brought into the church because of the activities and the things that have been offered to the young people in the church. Right now, we found them out there playing in the courtyard. They'll be active here in the evening. In addition to the young people, the activities there have been very outstanding. Our musical program has been just outstanding. I don't know of a church anywhere. I've never been in a church, in all the churches I've served, members in the state of South Carolina, North Carolina, Ohio, New York, and Pennsylvania, and all. I've been all over. I have never enjoyed a church as much, nor have I seen as fine a musical program as we have in this church. It is outstanding, and it's recognized all over the community.
It certainly is. I mean, listening to the various church choirs, as well as the main choir, and the bell, what do they call them? The bell ringers?
Bell ring.
Oh, it's...
Another thing that is a standout as far as I'm concerned, I'll never forget this. Dr. Johnson came here 22 years ago, and the reason I can tell you right off 22 years, because my son was member of the committee that brought him here when I was searching for pastor. He brought him here, and after he came here, my son Larry, who's an elder now in the church, said, "Well, now, when Dr. Johnson comes, I want him to baptize our firstborn, Leslie. She's now 22 years old, and I remember clearly that she was the first child that he baptized when he came to Columbus, Georgia. So I can always remember 22 years.
That's a very good way to remember.
Absolutely.
Certainly will. What do you think you might advise the people, or where would you like to see the church be 30 years from now, and what advice might you give the people of the congregation? What would you hope to see?
Well, I would hope to see the church continue to strive to be outstanding in its ministry to the people. The church, we are a downtown church now. And of course, a lot of them have moved to the outskirts. But our church has really thrived in this area. A lot of churches, the membership have dropped off and decreased. But with the work that's going on down here, why we have not only survived, but I say we've thrived down here. Right now we're looking forward to a building program, enhancing the building and the possibility for further ministry, not only to the children, but to the adults. We need more space, we need more facilities. Other churches have provided, and we're in the process now, and I have every reason to believe and faith that we're going to go right ahead and meet our goal in this. And whether or not we remain here 30 or 40 years from now, I don't know. But I still say that we're still going to be a strong, strong church with the leadership that's been provided in the past, the leadership that we're going to have coming into the future. We've got the people here, and we're going to carry it right on forward. Our young people, we've got outstanding young people. You see them in the choirs, you see them around when they put on programs. Those young people are the ones that will be sitting around and be the elders and the deacons in years ahead.
Maybe they'll be watching us. Maybe some of those young people are.
And you see outstanding leadership in those youngsters right now. They'll carry us right on forward.
I'm sure they will.
No doubt about it.
That is something that has been said over and over again. The youth program and the friendliness of the church and the willingness of the congregation to come forward and do what's necessary in the way of buildings.
Correct.
Or maintaining.
Right.
Is there any one person that you would point out? You have pointed out the ministers and Dr. Johnson. Are there other people, any one person that you think, or people that you think, or do you think the general leadership has been strong?
I think the general leadership has been strong. Let me mention two people. They're not living now. When I came to Columbus and sat in on the elders, there were fine elders, the entire party was, but there were two men that I must mention. I've said this before. I consider them to be pillars of the church. One of them was Mr. John Tennent, Sr., and the other one was Mr. Paul McKinney, Sr. Now, Mr. Paul McKinney, we would discuss things around on the Board of Elders and some church programs and so on. And I can notice that Mr. McKinney right now sitting up in the chapel, and the elders are meeting, and he'd listen to what was being said, and he'd absorb what was being said. And I can hear him right now. He said, well, I appreciate everything's been said, but let me make a statement, let me make a comment. Everybody would sit up and listen to what Mr. McKinney said. In some way, he would hit the nail on the head. He knew he'd go right to the heart of the thing, right to the crust of the thing, and we admired Mr. Tennent and Mr. McKinney very much. That's Mr. Paul McKinney. And Mr. John Tennent didn't speak up quite as much. But when he came forward, he was the same thing. Everybody stopped and listened to what Mr. Tennent had to say. Now, he's got a fine son, Mr. John Tennent, Jr., is in the church, an elder, a great leader in the church right now. But I go back, when I first came here, those two men stood out to me as pillars of the church. And I know we got many other pillars also in there right now.
Well, we certainly have, and of course that's what the church is built on. So, those strong pillars.
That is correct.
We are certainly willing to deal with the. I want you to tell me some of the other things that have been important to you too.
Well, the important some of the other important things I think is some of the programs that have been brought into being. One outstanding thing that I told Dr. Johnson, he said a few years ago he wanted to start a midweek service, a luncheon down here at the church, meeting on Thursday at noontime. He said, I believe if we can have a little luncheon, a brief devotional service, short message, and then let it have a brief luncheon in our hall. He said, I believe the people from other congregations, community, businessmen and women will come in and enjoy the devotion, come into church. I said, Dr. Johnson, I admire you for what you're about to undertake. You think you're going to undertake it. But I just don't believe that'll go over. Well, that just goes to show the many times that Eben Reid's been wrong. He put the thing on, and it's been highly successful. My wife and I used to come every Thursday. We'd enjoy it coming down here since she passed away. I haven't been down as regularly as I used to come, but she thoroughly enjoyed it, and the people that are coming down here now enjoy it. That is one thing that I think we enjoy very much. And then also the Wednesday night program has been extremely good. Now our Christian education program is the finest now that it ever has been. We've got fine teachers, instructors, from the youngsters, from one down to the toddlers, right straight on through. And Dr. Johnson, going back to him, he has the ability to communicate with people of all ages. I see him when he greets people going out from the congregation. He'll greet mother and father. He's going out the door, and he'll look down and he'll say, little Johnny or Susie. And how he remembers their names, I don't know. But he does. He not only knows mother and dad and their names, but he calls all the little youngsters. He'll call them by name. And I see them around, but I don't pick up the names the way he does. Has a marvelous memory. So that has been good. And the Wednesday night services, they have broadened them, made them far more interesting. And we have people that are coming in, I think, as a result of the outstanding extra work that is done in the church.
Well, I think those all have been wonderful points. And thank you so much, Eben Reid, for coming and being with us today.
It's been a pleasure. Even at my age, I still look forward to many, many more days here in this fine church. In spite of my age, everybody's still pleasant to me, the youngsters, the adults, and everybody in all ages. I still enjoy the church immensely every week. If I ever have to miss a Sunday, I feel something's missing from my life. That's the way I feel.
Thank you. Today, with these interviews, longtime members of our church have tried to give you a picture of First Presbyterian Church in February 1993 as it lives and breathes, and some of the history of the church as they see it, and some of the things they think have made the church what it is today, and what they hope to see in the future. So this is February 1993, First Presbyterian Church, under the guidance and leadership of our inspired pastor, Dr. James V. Johnson.
In 30 years from today, which is April 8th, 1993, you will have the opportunity to view, if you have the equipment, this videotape which we're making today. Those of you who are watching will be some of the people who are in our church now. Some of you will be new people who have come into our church since. We have on this tape reminiscences from 6 people who have been members of our church for a long time, giving you some of the history of our church so that things that are not written down in books but are enshrined in the hearts and minds of church members of long standing will be preserved for you when our time capsule is opened in 2023. Following the reminiscences of the 6 people that you have already observed on this tape, let me review for you the current situation in our church. Our church is filled with young couples that have many, many little children. In fact, having so many little children, who will of course be growing up in the church, has provided the impetus for a campaign to raise $2 million to build new facilities and to refurbish present facilities. In 2023, that may sound like small potatoes, but in 1993, it's quite a stretch. Our annual church budget is approximately $1 million. We're endeavoring to raise $2 million over and above that in order to build a family life center, in order to increase the size of our fellowship hall, provide facilities for a daycare center, and put in first-class condition all of our current facilities. You who come along in 2023 will, I hope and pray, benefit greatly from the building program that we are about to launch here in our church now. I hope you will be grateful for what we are doing, just as we in 1993 are grateful for what the people back in 1862 did when they built our beautiful sanctuary and related buildings at that time. Our church is also at another crossroads. In less than 2 months, I will be retiring after having served 22 years in this wonderful church. The church has already found an excellent interim pastor, Dr. Jack Lancaster, recently retired pastor of the First Presbyterian Church of Houston, Texas. He will be here on June 1st and will stay as long as needed while the church searches for a new pastor to install. The committee to conduct the search has not yet been named, since our book of order requires that the current minister depart before the new committee is selected and begins its work. No one knows, of course, who the new pastor will be. You will know, and you will look back on his or her ministry with gratitude. Perhaps that pastor will stay 30 years and will be the pastor when this time capsule is open. Perhaps not. There will be a challenge for the new pastor. The challenge, first of all, to lead the church in a worthy utilization of the new facilities which we will begin constructing this summer. Being a good steward of so much that is being prepared and constructed after a great deal of thought and study and prayer will indeed test the abilities of the lay leaders and, of course, the new pastor. There is the additional challenge of the circumstance that Columbus is growing and new subdivisions are being started farther and farther away from the heart of the city. This means that people will need to drive farther and farther to come to this church. That will constitute a tremendous challenge for the leadership in the next 30 years. The city of Columbus is greatly blessed to have 5 downtown churches all close to each other, which are thriving, which cooperate beautifully, and which help each other. The St. Luke United Methodist Church, the First Baptist Church, the Holy Family Catholic Church, and the Trinity Episcopal Church are all doing well. And all of these churches, together with the First Presbyterian Church, bolster each other as they seek to minister to this great city in the downtown area. For 22 years, it has been my privilege to be the pastor of this great church. As retirement approaches in less than 2 months, my wife and I are smitten with mixed feelings. We shall miss you all dreadfully. We're grateful for the time that we've had together and the love that we've shared and the experiences that we have undergone, joys and sorrows. On the other hand, we have a feeling of excitement about moving to Princeton, New Jersey, where I shall have the new privilege of being a part-time faculty member at the seminary. We do feel that it is important for the new pastor, whoever he or she is, to have a clear entrance into the hearts and minds of all the people. You, of course, will never be absent from our thoughts and prayers, even though we may be physically absent from Columbus, Georgia. And we entertain the hope and the prayer that we, even though we are 1,000 miles away, will never be absent from your hearts and your lives.